Hi, welcome to the Blueprints to Buildings podcast. I'm your host, Glen Palmer, and on this show, we interview the movers and shakers in the world of property development and real estate. Now, this episode is powered by a prop tech innovation that is flipping the script on how developments are visualized and sold. Not just outdated 3D models, there is no guesswork, just a faster route from conception to completion, often cutting 8 to 12 weeks off project timelines. If you want to see it in action, reach out to me on LinkedIn or check out the show notes below. So, on today's show, I am joined by Oriana Fernandez. Now, she is an architectural and urban designer with over 16 years of international experience across London and India. Now, she's the secretary at REBA London. She's a mentor for the University of Westminster and REBA Future Architects program. So she's very, very busy. She's actively shaping the next generation of architectural talents, which is I love. And she's also a published writer, influencing how we think about cities and how we build them. So, Ariana, thank you very much for being on the show. You have a lot of jobs, so I know you're busy, so we'll keep it quite short and sharp. And let's jump in, shall we?
Yes, sounds good.
So, if time travel became a reality and you had a chance to go back in time to when you first started your career, what advice would you give your younger self?
So I tell my younger self these three main things. So firstly, your qualifications are real because I trained at the Gore College of Architecture, then specialized in urban design at CEPT University in Ahmedabad. And I was already a practicing architect with years of experience before I moved to London. Yet I still found myself in situations where I accepted my expertise being undervalued because I was navigating a new system. I tell that
Yeah.
younger version of me, you're not starting from scratch, you're adding another chapter. Secondly, I would document everything, like keep records of your contributions, your decisions, communications. I know it sounds cynical, but it protects you and it's actually just good professional practice. And thirdly, build your network deliberately and generously because the mentors I found through programs like Built by Us, the relationships I've built through REBA London, and the students I now mentor myself, these connections have shaped my career more than any single job. So give as much as you take and start earlier than you think you need to. And perhaps
Mm.
underneath all of that, the path to UK registration isn't linear, and the persistence and resilience it requires will build something valuable in you. I'm still on that journey pursuing my part two through ARB prescribed examinations. So it's not a detour, it's just my route.
Yeah. And so, Ariane, you've worked um, from individual buildings to pretty much whole neighborhoods. So, how does your thinking shift when designing, let's say, a street corner versus shaping a whole urban block? How does that work?
So when I was studying urban design at CEPT University and later at the University of Westminster, one of my professors said something that stayed with me and I still use it till today. Buildings are nouns, but urban design is grammar. It's about how things relate and not what they're like in isolation. So at building scale, you're composing a singular response. You control the narrative, the sequence of spaces, the experience. You build that up. And when you shift to neighborhood scale, you're no longer the author. You're setting up conditions for stories you'll never fully know.
Hmm.
You're thinking about thresholds, ground planes, sight lines, how the street section creates or destroys street life. My current work has given me an unexpected lens on this. I'm coordinating Building Safety Act compliance across 63 residential blocks. So when you're
Yeah. Wow.
assessing fire strategy at that scale, you're forced to think systematically. How escape routes interconnect, how fire service access works across a whole estate, how one building's cladding relates to its neighbor's risk profile. It's a different kind of urban thinking because
Mm.
the system is a system of interdependencies, including in emergencies. And what connects both scales is the question of how people actually live. Whether I'm designing a courtyard or assessing a neighborhood's evacuation strategy, I'm trying to understand patterns of occupation, movement, and dwelling.
Yeah. And wow, I love that analogy that you gave right at the beginning. It was great. So, having designed across London and then obviously India, what differences have you observed in how communities interact with architecture? And how does, different cultures influence the urban form?
So before coming to London, I had an exercise where I documented vernacular Goan architecture. So you have houses that have evolved over generations in response to climate. We have the monsoons in Goa. Then you have
Yeah.
different communities. You have the Catholic and Hindu traditions intermingling. Of course, Portuguese colonial influence layered over these local building practices.
Wow.
So, what strikes me the most about the contrast with London is the threshold. We always go back to that word. In
Yeah.
Goa, the boundary between inside and outside is porous by necessity and by culture. We have the balcony or the covered porch is neither fully public nor is it fully private. And then you have courtyards which bring sky and rain and light into the heart of the house. Streets
Mm.
become extensions of domestic life. Neighbors are unavoidably present. And then, of course, you have London's terraced houses, which operate on completely different assumptions. You have a front garden as defensible space and a bay window that lets you observe the street while remaining separate from it. There's like a hard line between a public pavement and private interior. It reflects different expectations about privacy, community, and what you owe your neighbors. And I've been exploring these questions in my writing for building design, so covering Shahid
Mm.
Salim's research on British mosque architecture, which argues these buildings represent cultural resistance rather than architectural failure. Also
Hmm.
wrote about research on the Basilica of Bom Jesu in Old Goa, explaining how photography shaped its cultural identity. So what fascinates me is how communities use built form to assert belonging, sometimes deliberately, against
Yeah.
prevailing architectural norms. So architecture becomes a form of speech.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's a really good insight and really good views. And it's amazing how the differences are between, I mean, I've visited India, didn't go to Goa, but I've visited India and how the different houses compared to like a urban street in London compared to something in India is it's miles
Yeah.
apart. So, in your role in DB3 Group, how do you balance that technical precision with that creative ambition? And what are the biggest technical challenges that architects face right now?
I'd reframe the question because post Grenfell, the relationship between technical precision and creative ambition has fundamentally changed.
Yeah.
They're no longer in tension. Technical competence is what makes creative ambition ethical. So I completed my Part 4 course in fire safety, building resilience, and the principal designer role at London School of Architecture.
Hmm.
And you have the Building Safety Act, which introduces the golden thread. So that's like the requirement for accurate, accessible building information throughout a building's life cycle. It sounds bureaucratic, but it's actually a profound shift in accountability. So design decisions now have traceable consequences. The biggest technical challenges facing architects right now, I guess, firstly, the competence gap. The industry doesn't have enough people who genuinely understand building safety, fire engineering principles, and the regulatory framework. So we need to train them urgently. Second, the cultural shift from design it, sign it, move on to genuine whole life
Oh,
accountability. Some practitioners haven't accepted this yet. And thirdly, information management across fragmented project teams. When you have multiple consultants, contractors, and client stakeholders, maintaining that golden thread requires systems and disciplines that the profession historically hasn't prioritized. It's not
yeah.
glamorous, but this is where the profession's credibility gets rebuilt or it doesn't.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It isn't glamorous, and especially with like you say, with the Grenfell Towers, it has totally changed the way that we look at buildings nowadays. And some of it, whether it be an evil necessity, as some people like to call it, it is a necessity and it is there to stay. So we just got to adapt, haven't we?
Yep.
So. Your work with Reba and your student mentoring, what skills do you think the future architects must develop right now to thrive in the next decade?
So in addition to the mentoring, I also judge the REBA London Student Awards. So I spend a lot of time thinking about what students need and what they're not getting.
Yeah.
So firstly, there's the regulatory literacy, Building Safety Act, competence frameworks, liability landscape. This isn't a specialism anymore. It's baseline knowledge. So students need to graduate understanding that design decisions have legal consequences and that I didn't know isn't a defense.
Yeah.
Second, real communication skills, not just presentation techniques, but actual ability to listen, translate technical information for non-technical audiences, and navigating disagreement productively. So even the projects I work on, they involve residents, building managers, fire engineers, contractors, and there are multiple client bodies. So you need to move fluently between those conversations. Thirdly, resilience and self advocacy. I mentor students partly because I know how brutal the profession can be to navigate, especially if you're coming from outside traditional pathways, if you trained internationally or you don't have family connections in the
Mm.
industry. I want students to develop the confidence to know their worth and advocate for themselves because no one else will do it consistently.
Yeah.
And fourth, critical thinking about technology. Uh, I recently wrote for building design about how practices like Foster, Zahadi, and Herzog de Meuron are navigating AI. So the students I work with, they're digital natives, but that doesn't automatically mean they're thinking critically about what these tools enable and what they obscure.
Mm.
Speed isn't insight, so output isn't judgment either.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then moving, sort of additional question to that is, with the rapid advance of all these, immersive 3D visualization tools, the digital twins that we've got nowadays, the AI assisted modeling, how do you see these tools reshaping urban design communication? Particularly when it comes to sort of like stakeholder engagement, or if it's planning approvals, or even community consultation. And how do you think immersive presentation is becoming as important as the design itself in just gaining that buy-in from the communities, from the planning permission, local authorities, that sort of thing?
So there's a question embedded in your question which is interesting. Is immersive presentation becoming as important as design itself? I'd push back on that framing, but I understand why you're asking it because better
Mm.
visualization tools can democratize participation. When you when you can walk a resident through their future view at eye level or show a planning committee exactly how shadow will fall at different times of the year, you're shifting from trust the expert to see for yourself. That's
Yeah.
potentially more accountable, more honest. But there's a risk of seduction because you have photorealistic renders which can obscure as much as they reveal. So I've written about AI in architecture, and one thing I noted is that the speed of generating options can create an illusion of exploration while actually narrowing the conversation to what the tool makes easy to produce. So fluency isn't the same as depth. And for community consultation, I don't think technology is a limiting factor. The question is whether we're actually listening to what people tell us. Like a
Mm.
hand-drawn sketch from a resident who's lived in a place for like 30 years can be more valuable than any digital twin. If it captures the knowledge about that place, how it works, the shortcuts, the gathering spots where people meet up, problems that don't show up in data. So the tools matter, but the disposition matters more. Are you using visualization to persuade people of what you've already decided, or do you want to explore alternatives together?
Yeah. That's a unique way of seeing it, Ariana, to be honest. And as a writer for building design, how do you see the conversations around architecture evolving? And are we now designing differently because of climate, because of technology, or social change?
So writing for building design has given me a very specific vantage point. So I cover practice profiles recently, Got Scott and Hugh Strange, and I write about cultural identity in architecture. What I've observed is multiple conversations happening or running simultaneously, not always in sync. There's the post-Grenfell reckoning. This isn't
Mm.
just about cladding or fire safety in a narrow sense. It's a fundamental reassessment of professional competence, accountability, and what it means to sign your name to something.
Yeah.
The Building Safety Act is forcing changes that the profession should have made voluntarily years ago. Then there's a climate conversation, which has finally moved from should we or to how do we do it,
Yeah.
through the gap between conference rhetoric and construction site reality that remains vast. So you have embodied carbon retrofit versus demolition, circular economy principles. These are no longer fringe concerns, but implementation is patchy. And there's a growing conversation about who gets to be an architect, who has access to training, who can afford the qualification pathway. Does the profession reflect the communities it serves? International qualification recognition is part of this, and I'm navigating that system right now, having trained in India and now pursuing ARB registration through the prescribed exams. It shouldn't be this hard, and the barriers aren't primarily about competence. So, are we designing differently because of climate, technology, and social change? Yes, but very unevenly. Some
Mm.
practices are transforming, others are waiting to see if they can outlast the pressure. I don't think they can.
Yeah. And that's a interesting, quite a point of view that you actually made about, learning in a different country and then taking them skills and bringing them here. But because you haven't got the certifications in this country, you have to resit them. But you know all of this stuff. Perfect example, and just going off on a little bit of a tangent here, is I have my sister-in-law. She was a registered nurse. Didn't learn in this country. She learnt in South Africa. Got all her qualifications in South Africa, then came over here to study, only to realize she had to do them all over again, which I think is ridiculous in my point of view. So, I truly understand where you're coming from, Ariana. Um,
Yeah.
sorry for that little tangent. I just thought, it's a valid point that you make, and it should be that it should be transferable. It should be made a lot easier for people like you who have learnt in a different country to come over here and then just pick up where you left off without having to do any other degrees or qualifications. So anyway, pleasure having you on the show, Ariana. Really enjoyed our conversation. And it's definitely one of my favorite subjects is architecture. I love architecture. I love where the future of architecture is going. So once again, thanks for my listeners and the viewers of YouTube as well. Ariana, before we go, if listeners or viewers want to get in contact with you, learn about all the things that you do, what are the best ways for my listeners to do that?
So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and Instagram. LinkedIn for the
Okay.
more serious stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So just Google, not Google, search for your name, Oriana Fernandez, on LinkedIn, and you should find yourself there quite easily.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, quick reminder, this episode was supported by PropTech Visual Platform, changing how forward-thinking developers plan, pitch, and sell. It's not mainstream yet, but it soon will be. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, you know where to find me. You've been listening to Blueprints to Buildings podcast. I'm your host, Glen Palmer, and today I was joined by Oriana Fernandez. Thanks again for listening and watching, and I will see you on the next episode.